Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk about this comic right here. Batman issue number 50, The Wedding. The long-anticipated wedding between Batman and Catwoman. Comics fans are calling this a Last Jedi Moment for Batman comics, and possibly for DC comics in general. Why is that? Well, I'd like to dig in a little bit. It has to do with the way that this issue is being released. It has to do with what is actually in the issue and what fans are thinking about what is going on in this particular issue, as well as everything that's preceding it and built up to this particular conclusion. So let's dig into it. There are going to be some spoilers as to what's in this comic, and that's actually my first point. So before I get to the spoilers, let me give you one big point, which is that preceding the release of this comic, DC allowed the New York Times to have access to it and to publish an article that contained all the spoilers for this particular issue. And more importantly, rather than just having the spoilers in the article text, which can be avoided by fans who want to experience the comic, I guess, in real time, you had a spoiler, and pretty much the biggest spoiler, in the title of the article, which means if you're just browsing the internet and you are a Batman fan and you have this comic book on order, you know, your comic shop's going to pull it for you, and you see just the headline of it, you know how it all pans out. It's a complete spoiler, and that's a big problem for fans. So the release of this thing is basically being botched by DC, and they've actually put a lot of money into it. There's a bunch of different variant covers. There's a whole bunch of variant covers that are actually quite well done. A lot of money was being spent on the art. A lot of books were being printed and being shipped to comic book stores. And as a result of this spoiler coming out in the New York Times, a bunch of people are canceling their orders or telling comic shops not to pull the comic that they normally buy. So you have a possible crash of sales for the final issue of a very long-running storyline. Now, I'm going to give you some spoilers from here on out. So if you don't want to know the spoilers for this book and you're a longtime Batman reader, go ahead and turn the video off. But the big spoiler they released is, of course, Batman and Catwoman don't get married. She just leaves him at the altar, and that's the conclusion of the entire story, which is a bit anticlimactic. There's no specific reason, apparently, for doing this. I haven't read the book, but there's apparently no specific reason for this happening, and a lot of fans don't like that. They don't like the fact that not only did Batman and Catwoman not get married, because I would kind of expect them to not get married, but there wasn't something compelling that prevented that. There wasn't some discovery that was important that prevented them from actually getting married, or they didn't make like a noble decision. There wasn't like a break point that created this, this failure of a plot goal in Bruce Wayne and Catwoman getting married. But there's problems with that preceding this, which is Batman and Catwoman being a couple at all. Because Batman is a crime fighter and Catwoman is a criminal, it might be interesting to see how could we get these two together. How could love change them or change their attitudes? But I guess, and I haven't been reading this series, but I've talked to some people and I've read some stuff about it. I guess like Catwoman never really stops being a criminal. It's not like she reforms and does that to get with Batman. They're both just, they're separate entities, and now they're kind of lustfully getting married and turning Batman into the ultimate MGTOW when he gets left at the altar by his criminal fiance. So a lot of that stuff preceding it has to do with a relationship between the writer and the characters and the fans. And here's the meat of what I really want to talk about, is that in the comics industry, you have an issue, which is that the fans are very attached to characters. You have a long-running series of characters. The writers change, the artists, they change depending on what series is being made. But what doesn't change is the characters. And the fans are interested in buying Batman comics because Batman is in them, and they're going to see some permutation of Batman. And if you don't respect the fans' attachment to that character and their recognition of who Batman is, their knowledge of who he is, and you subvert that, you turn it on its head and destroy the essence of what makes Batman Batman, that's going to piss fans off. So the relationship between the industry and the fans is one that is becoming increasingly antagonistic. And if you've been following with Comicsgate, it's antagonistic in two ways. The first one is destroying the familiar characters that you know. It's one thing to create a new character that has the attributes that you want it to have and then to make a series for it and to sell it. It's another thing to take an established character that has a personality that people are used to, has a set of moral rules that they adhere to that the audience is aware of, and then to change that character into something they're not. Taking Iceman from, a typical heterosexual hero and making him explicitly gay or like a repressed gay character. That's something that doesn't sit well with fans. You could make a new character that is gay and see how it does, but to take an old character and fundamentally change something really important about them, including their sexuality, is not something that tends to sit well with fans. So you have a relationship between the makers and the people who consume, and that's just like The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi had this problem big time in that you have really long-time fans. You have fans that they've been on board with Star Wars for literally 40 years when Last Jedi comes out. And in those 40 years, they have a very clear idea of who the characters are, including Luke Skywalker. And so when you take Luke Skywalker and you subvert not just the expectation of how he's going to act, but of who he is, and you turn him from a heroic, resolute character who overcomes his issues, learns to deal with his mistakes, and becomes a real paragon, into somebody who's like a whiny old man, fans are not going to react well to that, partly because they're very attached to Luke Skywalker. That's why sequels exist. It's why you have these long-running series. It's why you have, 1,000 Spider-Man comics or 1,000 Superman comics, is because the character is special to the people who read it. And so when you destroy something very essential about that character, it really comes off as offensive and mean to the fans. It makes the fans kind of sick and angry at the writer, especially when you have an idea that the writing that you're introducing into the series is who that character actually is. Like, so once you turn the character into a mean little jerk in episode 8, he's a mean little jerk for the rest of the time. He never is the character that you grew up with and knew and have a very concrete knowledge of his limitations, his flaws, all those sorts of things. So this particular issue represents kind of the popping of the pimple of Batman as a character and what fans know about Batman, what they expect from Batman. He's dating a criminal because of lustful feelings, which means he's on one level it means he's human, and there's a lot of stories you can write there. But on another level, it means he's going against his normal values. This is a guy who had his parents get murdered, and therefore has a real not kind place in his heart for criminals and for people who choose to hurt other people. So to marry a thief, to marry a supervillain, that's something that is really kind of out of Batman's character, as the way that I know Batman. I don't read a lot of Batman comics now, but I've certainly consumed Batman comics in the past, and I've certainly seen a lot of Batman going back 30 years. So you have to think about it like that. What's the relationship with the fans? The other half of the relationship with the fans that you see with Comicsgate, and this is especially true with Marvel artists and Marvel writers, is they're highly antagonistic towards fans that are critical of them. So if the fan doesn't like the artwork, the fan doesn't like the storyline, he doesn't like what you did with the character, it's because the fan is like a whiny little bigot rather than somebody who had expectations that he wanted a business to fulfill for him, and the business failed to fulfill those expectations. In a way, having a subscription for a comic book is like having a subscription for termite treatment, for pest control. Once a month a guy comes out and sprays and makes sure the bugs don't come in your house. And so when the bugs come in your house, yeah, that's a rebelling against the expectations you had. It's like, I'm paying you to give you the thing that I want, not to give me something that I don't want. I wanted you to spray with something that would stop the bugs, not just spray water. Now, what's the last little part there is it's very difficult to be creative when you're dealing with long-running characters. You can't have them grow or change in all the ways that you would if you were in total artistic control of that character. But when you're handed a character like Batman, I think you have a responsibility to acknowledge and to work within the confines of what's been given to you. And that could be 40, 50, 70, 80 years worth of a character's growth, worth their definition as a character. All of those things, you have to take those into account when you're handed a property as a writer. You don't get full creative control as if you created the character itself. You're essentially one link in a very long chain, and you don't want to be the person who breaks that link by significantly altering or destroying what made that link valuable in the first place, especially from a business perspective. You really don't want to destroy Batman for people who really like Batman. So that's what I wanted to talk about today with comics, and I would like to know your opinions about this particular Batman issue and all of the interesting things surrounding it. Do you think it's a Last Jedi moment for the comics industry or for DC Comics and Batman in general? Or do you think that this is something that is being overblown? And keep in mind, there are fans. If you have a fan that dislikes this enough to stop buying DC Comics, you're not just losing, one issue. You're losing 10, 20 books that he might buy every single month. He might be a long tail fan. So isolating or, harming your relationship with certain fans is worse than harming your relationship with the general public in a lot of ways, because those are the fans that are not just buying Batman, they're buying Green Lantern, they're buying all of the properties in your company. They're buying the Superman comics. And if they stop buying all the comics, you're losing a lot, and that could have to do with their general attitude toward the company and the way the company views them as a customer, is taking characters that have a long-standing tradition and crapping on them doesn't usually make fans want to continue buying it. It's kind of like going to that restaurant. I use that restaurant analogy. If you get served a couple of bad meals, you're just not going to come anymore. So I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, and I hope you are enjoying. I hope you'll enjoy your Independence Day if you're here in the United States. Have a good one.